you need a much better understanding of the data you have. You need to understand, because now you can store so much more broad sets of data. So if you look at, I joke with a CIO recently, he was talking about, he's a banking organization, and he said to me, I want to take banking back to the 70s. And I was like, what on earth do you mean? Like, the technology in the 70s was a nightmare. And he said, no, not in terms of the infrastructure, the technology, but in terms of the customer experience. So back in the 70s, you walk into a bank, they know your name, they know, your dad, they know what job you had, they know, if you ask for a loan, they can immediately approve it. Think about trying to do that in India today. Like, you've got a massive population. How do you get the same level of personalization? It requires you to have, much more data. But that in turn means that you have a much greater risk. We have customers like MasterCard, where every single credit card transaction ends up in a Cloudera cluster. We have to get through PCI DSS with them. But protecting that data and making sure it's used in the right way from a legal and ethical standpoint as well. So all of those pieces come together. Cloudera specifically, the Cloudera data platform, which runs on-premise or in the cloud across multiple cloud providers. So we support Azure, Amazon, Google. We allow you to have a single control plane, a single security layer, a single governance layer. That becomes useful in a couple of ways. Firstly, it means that if one of the cloud providers gets breached, the data is still encrypted and protected by us. So there's no single point of failure. But it also means you can move a workload from one cloud provider to another. Yeah, if you look at the use cases, doing work with customers like MasterCard and others, they base a lot of what they do on the privacy by design framework. It came out of Toronto, an academic in Toronto created this framework where everything you do, you look at the entire privacy process from when you build the system to deploying it all the way through. Use cases have to be considered through that. So anytime you look at a new use case, you must look at, is it legal? Is it legal to do that in this country, in this location? Do we have the right to have the data? Have we asked the customer, do we have permission to use the data in that way? If we're keeping it for the right amount of time, because there are time limits on how long you have to keep the data as well. So you have to look at not just the ingestion, but the redaction and the disposal of that data through the life cycle. So it's really important to start thinking about the, not just the legality of a use case, but is it ethically right? The Gartner team, one of the Gartner analysts came up with the idea of the creepy line. Now you can have, there's a famous Tom Cruise film called Minority Report, where Tom Cruise kind of is walking through a city and they're scanning his eye and basically recognize him, and all the adverts change. It's kind of what the potential of the future of, life could be like. But you have to think about, how much invasion of a customer's privacy that occurs. And also how open to that they are. What's very interesting for me is, if you look at, people my age and how much data we're prepared to share, it's completely different to kids. Kids today grow up with their parents, posting their lives on Facebook and Snapchat and others. So they have different tolerances to data sharing. But if you really want to get a good feel for a use case, you need to think about what your parents would think about it. That's my indicator. Or it's like, is this use case, would this freak out my parents? And then kind of following those pieces through. There's a quote from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. The same applies with data. So when you talk about the space that we're in, it's typically, they branded it big data rather than just data, but it has 3 Vs: volume, velocity, and variety. People focus a lot on the volume, especially here in India because of the population you have. So, second biggest population in the world. They focus less on the velocity, though it's actually really important. The ability to bring that data in sub-second, respond in real time, and the same with the variety. If you think about the data touch points you have with a customer, they may be in your website. They may be going to the call center. My classic example is, my sister is a medic. My sister went into a bank in the US to try and do something. The bank teller was like, hey, I can't help you. So as she's walking out of the branch, she gets on her smartphone app and she goes into the bank app. She tries to do the same thing. She ended up in a live chat. So she had to explain to the live chat person, hey, look, I was in the branch. I tried to do this. It didn't work. And then over live chat, they basically said, look, we can't help you. So she called the call center. So she's talking to the call center and she says, I was in the branch doing this, and then I tried the app, and then I'm speaking to you now. So to the bank, she was in 3 different teams. She was dealing with a branch team, which had their own data and infrastructure. She was talking to the live chat, which is actually hosted remotely. She was then talking to the call center. But to my sister, she had a terrible experience with her bank, the brand. So the ability to track that journey across all those different systems, track the events and the paths, link it to things like NPS, Net Promoter Score, or CSAT is really important. So we help customers do that today at scale. So for some of the largest banks in the world, we do all that tracking. But you're really concerned about the outcome. Like, does the customer have a good experience? Are they going to stick with you? Are they going to move your credit card forward in the wallet or back? If we look at kind of the future, our platform is widely used for analytics. So people have traditionally done data warehousing. Data warehousing has had limits on it. Most customers had a vision of building an enterprise data warehouse, and in fact ended up with data warehouses, plural, enterprise data warehouses. They had time windows on them. We're letting customers store all of their data at a very different cost point, but be able to do very rich processing. But the real opportunity is going forward with things like machine learning and AI. Any use case today that uses data potentially can benefit from machine learning, and it'll give you a better customer experience. It'll give you better auditability of your financial crime systems, better ability to calculate risk. So customers will always benefit. But, as we look at the sort of booming population we have, if you look at, most countries now, they've had some degree of baby boom. So there's a smaller population that's coming through. That population has to be more efficient. We have to think better about how we produce food, all these systems, and data will help with all of this.